now it's starting. Great, thank you. So recording has started. Perfect. Thanks for pointing that out. So my name is Eva. Maybe you know me from some of the previous webinars or trainings that I have given. I'm from Germany, and I have been working with Philanthropia for a long time now. I think it's 7 years or maybe even 8. So it's been a while. I have done my PhD in geography about the sustainability of project planning and how to include more people in project planning in a development project. And it was a case study in Nepal. I lived and worked in Nepal for 7 years, in Ecuador before that. And since 2019, I've been back in Germany, but I kept working in this field. And I think in the last 10 years, we've done tons of training, tons of webinars, etc., so that I have actually trained more than 8,000 people in the last 10 years. Budgeting is part of proposal writing, and so that has always been part of my responsibility as well. Whenever I worked on proposals and in project planning, so that's where my expertise comes from. See, now it's already, yeah, okay. Now arrows work, so I think I have to use that. What is a project budget? Basically, the budget describes the monetary aspects of the project and explains exactly which areas, on which areas and how much money should be spent. So we always say the budget is the description of your project in numbers. That's where you list out what you need money for, how much each section will cost, etc. Usually I say when somebody is used to reading budget and is good at reading budgets, they should be able to understand your project just by looking at the budget, just by looking at the numbers. So it really needs to represent every single thing that you're describing in your proposal as well. It's an area that needs a lot of attention to detail, definitely, because it's, I think, maybe not the most error-prone area, but a lot of stuff happens in the budget. Oftentimes when we see proposals that are submitted to us in a competition or in any other circumstances, we see mistakes in the budget. So this is where you really have to pay attention. It should be a great representation of what your proposal is and what you want to do with your project, where you want to get with your project, and what you want to achieve with your project. So really pay attention to this section, make sure that you have all the correct numbers, that you know what you're talking about, and that it really, describes every single aspect of your project. There's two main sections in the project budget, so two kind of different categories that you have to describe, and that is income and expenses. And oftentimes we see that in a project proposal, especially for small grants and new NGOs, the entire focus is on the expenses, which obviously makes sense because there will be a lot of expenses. You are applying for a grant, so you feel like you have to explain what you're going to spend the money for. But the income part is as important because, as we will see later, your own contribution, how much money you can actually bring to the project and you can contribute, is sorry, there was something popped up that threw me off. Is actually also very important to display all income that you have through the project. So expenses or expenditures, or however it is called, in the budget you have to prepare, enumerates how and where money will be spent. They might be itemized, summarized by category or activity, etc. We look at different ways to put that, but that describes how much you want to spend. So if you want to run a training, how much you have to spend for the training hall, how much you have to spend for the trainer, for food, for participants, transportation, etc. So everything you need to spend. If you want to build something, what's the building cost, how much money you have to invest, etc. So that describes basically how much you want to spend. In a project proposal, not necessarily just the money you're applying for, because that might be actually more. the money you need to spend might be more than the money you're applying for. So it's important to, at least in the first step, have a full budget, not only the budget that covers the part that you are applying for, but the entire budget that you would need to implement your project. And then you have the income part. So that is the part, the section where you describe how much money you will, take in with the project or other income sources. It includes all sources of project funding, other grants, donations, the value of in-kind gifts, value of volunteer hours, earned income, matching funds, etc. So everything that you also bring from other sources you have to include here. And again, it is important to show numbers here because donors often look at these numbers, how much income, how much own contribution you can bring as an indication of how dedicated you are, if others are on board, if others also want to contribute to your project, etc. So that's a good sign for them, an indicator that you are a professional, that you really that you're good at your work, etc., that you have thought this whole thing through, that you have an idea for the sustainability plan, all these things. So whichever income you have here, you can show. So that means, again, if you already have another grant, maybe you already applied for a small grant and you already have the yes to that, that could be displayed in the income part. Or if you know that you're going to spend some money from your organization in this project. So if you have I don't know, membership fees that you can use and spend. Or if you know that you will collect some contribution from participants. For example, I used to work in an agricultural project and we would distribute plants. So we always collected a small fee for people to actually receive the plant. So they had to actually pay a little bit of money to be able to receive saplings. So that is something that will be included. If they give other kinds of contributions, like if they will work, if you build something and they will help you with that building, they will work on the project, you can calculate hours of work with the value of those hours attached to it. And earned income, if you sell something, if you have a social enterprise that produces something, matching funds, other donations, if you have private donations, all of this goes in the income part. So that's to develop the full budget, because the full expenses versus the full income, and then often the difference between those two is the money that you apply for, because that's usually what the money that is missing, that you don't have any, that you can't cover yourself, can't cover with any other sources. So that is the amount that you would apply for in this case. When should you develop the budget? That is also a question we get a lot of times. And in my personal opinion, I always advocate for writing a project plan first, having a good project plan that you can work with, that you can base your proposal on. And then that is the time when you would develop a budget. And then you have the budget, you know how much money you need, that will inform your donor research, that will inform every single other step. I know that in reality, sometimes we don't have enough time to write a proper project plan, and then we have to start working on the budget when we do the proposal. But then still, it shouldn't be an afterthought, obviously. Ideally is if you have a project plan, then you have a full budget, you know exactly what you're looking for, you know exactly how much money you need, and you can move from there. If you don't have that, obviously develop the budget alongside with your proposal narrative. I would not recommend to do it first, and I would not recommend to do it last either, but as like an ongoing activity, because if you do it first, oftentimes during the process of working on the proposal, some of the activities might change, etc. And then sometimes if you don't properly adjust the budget doesn't reflect your entire proposal. And we've seen that quite a lot, that there were activities that were not in the proposal but in the budget, or activities in the proposal that were not reflected in the budget. So that can be an issue. Don't do it last either, because then sometimes you run out of time. You might need to research specific numbers. Maybe you don't know how much everything costs. Maybe you need some information about rates. It will take time. For some proposals, you have to present 3 quotations. So to collect those quotations, that doesn't happen in a day. So just make sure that you have enough time for it. So I think it's a good, in an ideal world, you would prepare your budget when you prepare your project plan before you even think about applying anywhere. But I know oftentimes we cannot do that in the realities of our work. So then in those cases, I would say alongside the proposal, not first, not last, but always keeping an eye on the budget so that it still reflects the work that you want to do. Besides being able to present something to your donor and to send it out as part of the proposal, there's other uses for the budget. So other things that you can use the budget for and where it can help you. So for example, with transparency, especially if you're also collecting private donations, transparency is always a very important issue. That where you have to show how money is spent, etc. And the more clearly you are able to show a budget for every single project, the easier it is to also show, that you are transparent, show what you have going for yourself, etc. If you have to go out and get quotations and write a proper budget, you will probably also get better value for your money, because then you have to compare, you have to look at different offers, different quotations, you will talk to different companies, etc. And we'll look at different offers, and that will often provide you more value for your money, and it will force you to kind of really plan every single activity and see how you can do that most efficiently. You develop capacity of dealing with money when you prepare budgets, so that is always helpful. It ensures competitiveness often, because when you design a budget, then you realize, oh, this project ends up very expensive. Maybe you even have other proposals, other projects to compare to. So you know, oh, this is kind of over budget, this is under budget. You get a good feeling if the work you are proposing is competitive with your fellow NGOs, other organizations that offer similar services. So you will see a lot what's going on in this section. And developing the budget obviously forces you to follow the donor's guidelines, which makes it easier, I think, to understand them, because it forces you to sit down, read them again, understand exactly the structure they want to see, and that forces you to focus on the things that are important for the donor. And in our other webinars, when we talk about proposal writing, fundraising in general, we always explain and drill home how important it is to have to adhere to the guidelines, to follow the guidelines. Obviously, keeping true to your own theory of change, to your own ideas, to your own project. But then if you want to work with a donor, you really have to follow their guidelines, because they are the lead in what they want to see. And the same obviously goes for the budget. So sitting down, understanding in detail what donors want to see, how they want to see it implemented, etc., really helps you for those other sections as well. There's 2 main ways that you can design a budget. One is by activity and the other is by line item. And often you see in the guidelines that donors tell you which of those ways they want to see. Activity by activity is much easier than by line item. We have 2 examples on the next slides where you can see the exact difference. But sometimes donors are asking you for a budget by line item. So in those cases, obviously you have to show it to them, but it's easier to start with the project budget by activity. So this one is an example for a budget by activity. So you can see the basic structure of the budget. You have the expenses, or the description of the expenses on the left side. then a unit. So what is the unit you can kind of buy or get or acquire that that expense or that type of expense by, the number of units you need, the rate per unit, and then the sum. And then here at the bottom, you have the sum of the cost for that activity, and at the bottom, the total expenses, the total sum of every single activity combined. So yeah, activity-based means that you just follow through kind of thinking about your activities. What is your first activity in this project that we made up here? The first activity is an annual conference that they want to run. So for that conference, they need a trainer, they need a venue, they need transportation for their participants, catering, and materials. And so this is the activity 1. And in the proposal narrative, you will probably find a section that is called activity 1, where they describe exactly how they want to run this conference, who they want to invite, etc. So that is corresponding with the narrative, and you can find the reflection of that activity in the budget. This is very straightforward. I think it's also easy to plan because in your head, you can just go through the activity, think, okay, if we want to run a conference, obviously we need trainers, we need speakers. So that's one. Then we need a venue. It's logical, no? We need transportation, catering, etc. So you just go through the activity step by step. It's good if you don't do that by yourself, because even though it's logical, mistakes happen. I always say my personal thing is that in the first, I think 3 budgets that I designed, I forgot transportation cost every single time because I just didn't think of it. And also I just started working in Nepal. In Germany, transportation cost is like nothing because usually when you buy something, they bring that to your house for free in most cases. So it didn't occur to me that that was an issue, but obviously in Nepal, we were working in a small mountain village, and hiring a truck to get stuff from Kathmandu to our village, that was a considerable cost. And we needed a driver, the vehicle, then loading fees, etc. There was so much stuff that I didn't think about. And because it was just small proposals and my first ones, and I was working by myself, I was always lucky enough that somebody pointed it out, but I almost forgot it. So even if you feel like, oh, I'm super comfortable, I know what I'm talking about, always have someone with you to go through those activities so you don't miss anything, any kind of cost, because obviously that can happen. Then here we have an activity number 2, which is a volunteer training that this organization wants to run, which is separate from the conference. And for that as well, they need a trainer, they need a venue, catering, and handouts. And again, this activity will probably be reflected in the narrative of the activities as activity 2, obviously. So this is what an activity-based budget looks like. Straightforward, simple, good to understand. And again, also it really is a description of your project in numbers. It's missing the justification, obviously, but it's a good description. You kind of get the idea what this project is about, no? Because you know what they want to do. Now we get to the second type, kind of. It's the same budget, but based on line items. Line items means a category of cost. So not the activity themselves, but the kind of cost we're talking about. So in this example, the line items that they wanted to see were personnel cost. So every kind of personnel cost is added. And then service cost, and then other costs. But sometimes you will have categories. Yeah, personnel is a very common one, or administration, building, material, stuff like that. So different categories, line items. I think donors sometimes want to see this kind of budget and request it because they need to see how much money you're applying for a specific category of cost. Maybe they just have a limited budget, for example, to pay for personnel, or a limited budget to pay for material, and it needs to be more for personnel. Sometimes they have like a distinction in their head or in their system sometimes that only a specific percentage can be personnel, etc. Or at least they need to understand. So that is, I think, why they sometimes request this kind of budget. So again, it's the same example, And we've had, if you remember from the slide before, 2 activities. The first activity was the conference. The second activity was the volunteer training. And both activities needed a trainer. So here, the cost for those 2 trainers is combined into one. Because again, it's the line item, the category personnel. And then for services, the same. We have transportation and catering, which were both needed for both activities, and it's combined here. So the cost for both of those kinds of activities is combined. And then other cost was venue and material here. Again, you needed a venue and material for both activities. As you can imagine, to start designing a budget like this is super tricky, almost impossible, I would say, to forget nothing, because you don't go through it logically in your head, but you kind of just lump everything together. So even if you're just requested to design a budget by line item, we always recommend you start by activity. Even if you then have to discard your activity-based one, start with that because it's so much easier and it's so much more logical, and you will notice mistakes. In this kind of budget, it's so difficult to see if you're missing any transportation because it's here, but you can never know if you can include every single kind of transportation that you needed for the different activities. So start with that other one. Obviously, these budgets are very simple to show you the differences. Oftentimes, budgets are much more complicated, especially when you have to include personnel and not like freelance days or trainer days. Like to calculate a trainer day is very easy because you just ask their day rate and then you include that. But if you have full-time staff, obviously accounting for their salaries is more complicated. It also depends a lot on every single country that you operate in. Some countries have simpler laws, some have very difficult laws. For example, in Germany, you cannot determine the salary of a person just by saying, okay, this is what the position needs, but you have to pay everyone differently depending on how many children they have, how much experience they have, how many years they've worked for you, and then you have to increase the salary every year by a specific percentage, etc. So that becomes very complicated. That's why we always recommend you also include an accountant, someone who can help you with this, just to make sure that you don't make any mistakes. And again, personnel cost, I think, is the most complicated kind of cost that you can include. So when you can get some support, get help with someone, maybe the accountant or the administrator in your organization that has to deal with the invoices, etc., because they will know how to put it and how much money you actually need for every single kind of person you want to employ. Who should write the budget? I already went ahead a little bit on this slide. I think obviously you need, as a fundraiser or project manager or in whichever position you are, you need to give input and you need to write the budget. And if you're a fundraiser, you're going to kind of wear the head and be the lead on this. But if you can get input from your financial department staff, from an accountant, from someone who, really works with this kind of stuff every day, it's always advisable. Because you will, again, especially if it's stuff, it's so tricky to understand exactly how much salary you have to pay someone every year. Then if you have to pay like a 13th salary for Christmas, whatever, how to include that. All of this stuff is complicated and can be very complicated. So equally with the proposal, we always say include more people, don't just write it yourself, but get input from the project manager, from field officers, from other people. Obviously, that is very important, and it's the same for the budget. Get input from people who know what they're doing and who are experts and who can support you with developing a budget. What kind of cost can you include in your budget? We will talk about core cost in a bit. Can you include all these people in your proposal? That's a very common question we get, because obviously You need some people to run an organization, and your organization needs to run so that you can implement the project. But often it's very difficult to include this this kind of cost, these people, the cost for these people in your proposal. So for example, the accountant that will help you with your report, or that is already helping you with employing people, with designing the project budget, whatever. The proposal writer, if they're not employed, maybe you're working with a freelance proposal writer, that's going to cost you. Can you include that in the budget? Senior management or the fundraising department, you need all those people to run a successful organization, but can you include them? On the right side, we have project manager, program officer, a researcher, the marketing team. So I think the two very clear yeses are the project manager and the program officer, obviously. Usually if you have staff working directly on the project that you are applying for, you can include them, of course, because they will be running the project or the program. So obviously you can include 100% of their time, their cost in the project proposal if it's allowed by the guidelines. But all these other people, it depends a lot. It depends on the donor if they allow that. There is often a kind of lump sum you can include for core cost, which is between, sometimes it's only 5%, but usually I see around 10, sometimes up to 15%, that you can include to cover core cost. So then with that, if you can include that kind of lump sum, you have to include cost for people like accountant, a proposal writer, senior management, etc. If you're not allowed to do that, sometimes you can also include percentages. So especially senior management, if you know that they will have to spend a couple of hours every week on your project for whichever reason, you can include whatever 10% of their time, 15% of their time in your project proposal. Fundraiser proposal writer is very tricky to include. That's a very common question we also get when people always tell us, could you not write a proposal for us and we put you in the budget, and then if we win the proposal, you get a percentage. Donors do not like that. So we strongly advise against that. Yeah, on paper, it makes sense, kind of, or it could be justifiable, because if you don't have a professional fundraiser, maybe you, or a proposal writer, maybe you wouldn't even be able to get that project, that grant. But when you apply for a project, the donors only want to see you include cost that is strictly going to be paid on the project once you implement it. So you cannot look back and say, oh, we needed the researcher, we needed the proposal writer to actually get to the point where we are at now. But you have to look in front and say, okay, this is the cost that is going to come up when we run the project. So yeah, for some of these people, it's very tricky to include them. Some of the costs can sometimes be covered by the core cost percentage when you're allowed to include that. But usually you cannot include them, and you kind of have to come up with that money from a different source, which I know is a challenge, but is unfortunately often the situation we're in. So yeah, core cost, overhead cost, that is a section of the budget that we have to cover and think about. What is that? Overhead cost is the cost that occurs to run an organization that's not directly related to the project implementation. So it is people like the accountant that helps you run the organization smoothly, or rent for your office building, or insurance payments that you have to make for your employees, or for the material that you're working with, for the building that you're operating in, etc. All of that stuff is overhead cost. And as I said, often you can include a specific percentage, 10%, 12%, 8%. The donor will usually tell you how much you can include here. It's either you can find this number in the guidelines, and if you can't figure out how much you can include, then that's a good question you can ask them when you reach out. When you want to start a conversation with them, that is a good question. that you can ask, because knowing exactly that percentage is important. Because if they give 12%, you also want to include those 12 and not want to be stuck with 10 only. You sometimes, like I said, if people do work for your project, you can sometimes include part of the cost. So if you have let's say you rent a full office building, and 10 rooms out of those, let's say 20 rooms, just a fantasy example, but the building has 20 rooms and 10 rooms are used by the people that work in your project. I would say usually then you can include 50% of the rent for that building, because it's used for the project. Without those rooms, the project wouldn't happen. That's where the people have to work, no? But it always depends on the donor if that is allowed. And if you're not clear about it, I think I would ask this as a question to know if you are allowed to include cost that way to cover overhead, and include, also this kind of cost in your project budget, or if you're not allowed. That I would ask that before I just do it. But sometimes with a little bit of fantasy, you can find ways to include cost that you would maybe in other projects cover with your overhead into the project budget itself. Another category that you have to show in the budget, we've talked about a little bit in the beginning, are co-payments. So co-payments is the payment or the money that has to come from your own organization. And that is not other grants, and that is not money you get from the government, but that is really money that comes from your organization. So it depends where that money can come from by the donor. Again, if you're not sure, then ask, because I'd always try to be on the safe side here. I know in Germany, there's some organizations or some of donors that you can apply with that do accept that. They say, okay, own contribution can be private donations, can be other grants, etc. We don't care. It just needs to come from your side. That's it. There's other donors that say, oh no, it cannot be a different grant and it cannot be donations. It needs to come, it needs to be income generated by your organization. So that depends on the donor. So try to find out what kind of money you can you can show as your co-payment or your own contribution. You can also ask project participants to add to that, and especially if you're applying for small grants that can become a substantial amount quite quickly. So as I said, when I was working in Nepal in this agriculture project, what we used to do is we collected small amounts from participants that then kind of amassed to a lot very quickly. So for every plant, they had to pay a couple of rupees. For every service, they had to pay a little bit. We also asked them to support us with labor. So then you can, in the budget, like if you have 10 people working for 10 days, then you just put the value of one working day per person and multiply, and then you can use that monetary value of that labor in your proposal as your own contribution. Or if you can also ask them to contribute in kind with things that they have already. So whenever we were building something, we asked farmers to contribute bamboo, because we needed bamboo for structures, etc. But if we would have bought bamboo in Kathmandu, it was very expensive. If we just asked them to cut the bamboo from their own field and give to us, for them, it didn't matter that much because they were not selling to Kathmandu anyways. So we could actually use the price of bamboo from Kathmandu and say, okay, this is the monetary value of this bamboo. And then we had quite a big percentage of own contribution very quickly, kind of putting all this together. And this can also be money coming from your organization. So if you have any savings, etc., you can take the co-payments out of those savings as well. Contingency cost is also something that you can sometimes include. Again, ask if you're not sure, if you don't know. That is a percentage that you can sometimes include. I've seen 5%, sometimes even 7%, depending on the volatility of the environment you're working in. that is cost that you maybe think that might occur, but you're not 100% sure, just to cover for eventuality. So what this covers for is if the prices rise, because yeah, especially with the inflation rates that we have now, between you sending the proposal and you getting the grant, there can be up to like 6, 7, 8 months of time, and then yeah, you need to be able to still buy all that stuff even if the prices have gone up a bit, or especially if you apply in a different currency from your home currency to adjust for the exchange rate changing. So we've had that quite a lot in Nepal as well, because the rupee was going up and down a lot in the time that I was there. So sometimes we applied of course, we asked for the price of something in rupees, then we would translate that into dollars because we had to apply in dollars. And then if we were very lucky, so then obviously we got the grant in dollars. If we were lucky and the rupee went down, we got more, but if it went up, we got less. So to account for those kinds of risks, often you can include a percentage as well. But again, if you don't know exactly if you can and how much, then ask. Always check back with the donor. And we have webinars as well, so you can check that about donor networking. And that is an amazing way to start a conversation. If you have these very specific questions to a donor, you're not sure if you can and how you can include something, then those are good conversation starters. If you have those specific questions that you cannot find an answer to anywhere, donors often like to connect over these things. And then we have the budget narrative, which is, as it says, a narrative part about the budget. So some donors request that. It's basically a text describing the budget again. Or describing or sometimes giving reasoning for specific choices in the budget. Some donors request it, so then you have to do it. Some don't, but you should include a budget narrative if there's anything in your budget that needs further explaining. So anything where the choice isn't obvious. For example, if you have to choose something that is more expensive than the market value, for example, because it's difficult in your country to get, or because the quality of that more expensive item is way better or way more appropriate for the circumstances that you navigate in. All of those points, if they are true, then you have to add the narrative, because otherwise the donors will not understand and will think you either made a mistake or you're trying to overcharge them, or there's something weird going on. I remember I had one budget where that was kind of the eye-opening moment for me, where I understood, okay, that's when you need a budget narrative, is when I applied for a project in Ecuador, and it was about planting palm trees, and we needed to buy the seeds for the palm trees and fertilizer. And the village was in the middle of the rainforest, so the only way to transport things was by river. But the fertilizer was upstream, and we had to buy it upstream. And the seeds, we had to buy them downstream. So obviously the transportation cost for the fertilizer was way less, because we had to go with the empty boat upstream and the full boat downstream. So we didn't need as much petrol. But for the seeds, we went with the empty boat downstream and with the full boat upstream, because we had to go back. And so we needed way more petrol. So in my budget, I put transportation cost for the fertilizer was half or even 1/3 only, I think, of the transportation cost for the seeds, but the kilometers were the same. So I got lucky because the donors called me and they said, what, you made a mistake here, transportation cost doesn't make sense. And then I was able to explain to them what the reasoning behind that was. But I got lucky that they called me. Oftentimes they will just discard something if it looks like a mistake. No, because I didn't explain anything, it looked like a mistake. But those are cases where you can add a budget narrative just to give some more context to what you are trying to explain. So whenever you think, oh, this is a bit off, or this is different, then this is not 100% logical, then add a budget narrative to make sure that the donor has a chance to understand what you're trying with this budget, or why you have included this specific type of cost, or why you have included a higher cost or lower cost, etc. Whenever you have a situation like that, that is the moment where you should include a budget narrative and focus more on that. Yeah, we've talked about that. Those are the cases where you should include the narrative, either when it's requested by the donor or when you feel like there's necessity, because there's elements in your budget that need some more explaining, that need some more details. And it depends a bit. Of course, it goes wherever the donor tells you it goes, if they request it. Otherwise, I would always put it right behind the budget, because obviously it's connected. So in my opinion, it should be right behind the budget, so that when they look at the numbers, they can also immediately refer to the narrative and understand why you included those specific numbers and how you came up with all of this. 10 quick tips to wrap this up. Tip number 1, definitely don't leave it for last, because again, the things we do last, they always get rushed. You don't take time, you do them too quickly, you make easy mistakes. Also, yeah, then you don't have time to get correct numbers. Sometimes you don't have time to get all the quotations you need, etc. So don't leave it for last. Don't do it first either, but don't leave it for the very last step. Make sure you have all the correct numbers. So go to the shop if you have to check if you have the right numbers, because many times when I thought I knew how much something would be, I was way off, realizing that when you go to the shop and you actually ask, oh, okay, this is this much with tax, okay, and then you need installation cost and you need a little bit more than you think. So really calculate and check that you have the correct numbers, that you went to the shop, that you have the quotation, so that you base your budget on something realistic. Check the format the donor wants you to use, if there is any, and otherwise just pick one and stick with it. It's like we said, you should work on the budget in a team, and then sometimes the issue is that different team members use different systems, etc. But try to pick one, stick with it. Also for the format, obviously it will probably be Excel, but then make sure you don't copy formulas, etc., that everybody's on the same page and that it always looks the same. Check the math not only once. There should be no mistakes in your budget, because if you make a mistake in your budget and you win the grant and then you go back to the donor and say, oh, sorry, we actually applied for 10,000 euros less than we need because we made a calculation error, that's not going to go across very well. So really make sure that everything you have is correct. There are no mistakes in there. Check it 3, 4, 5 times and have somebody else check it as well. Calculate realistically. Sometimes we have the tendency to be too optimistic when we want to apply for a project, just to maybe fit within some limits. But yeah, you need to calculate realistically, because whatever you promise in a project proposal, then the donor expects you to actually deliver on that with the budget provided. So it's very, very difficult to go back and ask for more money. You should really, yeah, calculate realistically. Also, don't over-calculate, obviously. If you're trying to make your project too expensive, or if you just have guesses and you way over budget and the donor knows your country and knows your circumstances, then that also doesn't go across very well. Include everything. Have someone else look at the budget with you to make sure that everything goes smoothly, and that everything is included. Think about inflation and exchange rates. That's what contingency cost is for. Hopefully you're allowed to include that, but keep that in mind, that that might be an issue. Explain extraordinary cost with your budget narrative if you have to. If there's anything that you feel like is not logical, yeah, make the budget writing a group activity, get the input from everyone so you don't forget anything and you have more than one pair of eyes looking at it. And have someone proofread your budget in the context of your proposal. Often when we have proofreaders and we pass them the proposal, they only read the narrative, but they should also look at the budget, because that part is just as important and is just as crucial that it is correct as the other parts. And if you have a proofreader that says, oh, I can only read text, I'm not looking at the budget, then get someone else to look at the budget. But ideally, they should look at both, because again, your budget needs to reflect the proposal. So it needs to be corrected, it needs to be congruent with the activities you describe, etc. And to notice gaps in that, obviously you have to read both parts. Those are 10 quick tips to finalize. Getting stuck in this presentation. In the end, we will have time for questions in a moment. I just want to let you know about the special offer we have at the moment, because we have a big sale going on our flagship course, The 5 Obstacles on Your Way to Fundraising Success and How to Overcome Them. In that course, we cover all the 5 steps to fundraising success that we have identified, starting with the development of the strategy, over donor research, donor networking, eligibility, and proposal writing. So it's a 5-module course that you can take over the course of 5 weeks. You get a certificate at the end, and it's a really great introduction to fundraising and to this whole area and to this whole part. And usually we sell it at $299, which is already a steal because it's really a big course with a lot of content. But right now we have it on sale for $150 only. If you use the coupon code Year of Change, you can get it for this reduced price. I think, to be honest, I think my team lost the connection. At least I can't see them anymore. I think they're not online right now. So usually they would be dropping the link into the comment section right now, but they can't. But you will get a follow-up email because you signed up to this course. I think they're back now. Okay. So if you're here, Manju or Amrita, maybe you can drop the link to the course in the chat. Otherwise, you will receive the link to this offer again in the follow-up email that you get after the webinar. Or you just go to philanthropia.org and you can find the course there. And you can use the code Year of Change to get this for half price. Again, I can only recommend it. I've poured my heart blood into this course. I think it's really amazing, and it's really going to lift your fundraising to another level. Okay, I'm getting stuck on this. Okay, this is I really need to get a new mouse. We also have many other online courses about different topics. For example, more specific ones, how to raise funds from USAID, or about online fundraising, fundraising from US foundations. You can find them all on philanthropia.org when you go to our online school, the Fundraising Institute. And with the coupon code FUNDRAISE, you can get all of those courses at 35% off. So please check out what we have to offer there on philanthropia.org and check the Fundraising Institute. Yeah, I think there's some issues with the team not being able to post the link right now, but you will get it by email, or otherwise go to philanthropia.org and check out for yourself all the courses that we have in the Fundraising Institute there. We also have the donor database, where you can find more than 5,000 donor profiles. You can find it at donordatabase.org. You can sign up for a week for free. So we always recommend that. Then you can see if a donor database works for you. And then if it does, then you can subscribe. I think price is $99 per year. And otherwise you can cancel, but I recommend you check it out to find more donors. Okay, so now we still have time for questions. Thank you so much for being part. I see we have a couple of questions in the Q&A section. First one is, can you explain more about the matching funds? Matching funds means different things in different circumstances. Often in a like companies offer stuff like that, or some foundations. They say, okay, if you for every dollar donated, we will match it with another dollar or euro or whichever currency you work in. Some organizations say however much you can contribute, they will contribute the same, etc. So they will match your whatever you can bring, they will match that with the same amount of money to then have your own contribution or just contributions to projects. Second question is about adding to the project planning. What else do we need to develop a budget? But I think I always say you should develop the budget with the project planning process, because to be able to develop a budget, you need to have a great idea of what your project is really supposed to be and what your project is, what the activities are that you want to do, etc. We have webinars on how to develop a project plan. So if you want to check those out, then please do so, where I go through all the elements of how to develop a project plan. And yeah, you need the information of what is needed, which activities you want to do, and then with that you can kind of move to developing the budget. Then there's a question about overhead. Can I still include overhead cost after charging admin costs such as internet, rent, fuel, equipment service to the budget? I think if it's that broad, internet, rent, and fuel, I mean, rent, it depends. I think that's something you have to really clear with every single donor that you like, the donor that you are talking to in that moment. Usually, I think if you internet seems a bit broad, I would say. If you're applying for a project that teaches kids how to use the internet, then I think you can use internet as a project cost. But if you're just charging like the office internet, then that's admin cost. And then I would say, okay, that belongs into the core cost percentage. Fuel as well. If you have to transport goods to be able to implement your project, then of course fuel is the project cost, because without, like, fuel was a project cost in that project I mentioned earlier with the boat, with the palm trees, because without it, there was no way we could have implemented the project. But if you include like a general fuel contribution or whatever for the office, then that's different. So it depends a bit. I think if it's so broad, then maybe I wouldn't include another admin charge or overhead charge. But if it's specifically connected to the project, then yes. And there's a question, can we classify as co-payment when the project is funded by 2 or more funders? That depends on the donor. Like I said, some accept that and some don't. So in those cases, you have to ask if they are okay with that or not. Same question. The second question is very similar to that. It depends on the donor if they accept other grants as co-payment or not. But that also speaks to the importance of you starting to, like, you having some resources to your name as an organization. I know that is very, very difficult, but trying to save some money with, like, sometimes you have money left over from a project, or I know it's difficult working with donors, because if it's project focused, then you have to spend it on the project. But usually if you have, for example, if you're an organization and you collect membership fees, trying to save those membership fees to have like a pooled fund that you can use for your own contribution if you have to at some point. Or if you collect fees from participants, etc., trying to save some of that money so that you have some kind of pool for your own contribution. What is the best tool for budget monitoring? To be honest, we don't use any tools, and often we're not really involved in the implementation process that much, but usually the organizations we work with still use Excel to kind of follow up with the cost they spent, the amount of money they spent, etc. Is it okay to add a detailed budget when the donor gave the template that requires the lump sum only? No, I mean, if the donor doesn't require it and doesn't tell you to include a budget and doesn't give you the format, then I wouldn't include it. But obviously, you still have to do it, because even to come up with a lump sum, you need to be you need to write a good budget and have a complete budget, right? So you would still have to write a full budget. I would think contingency cost and cash cushion, that's one question, would be the same. So I don't think that you can add those kind of categories in one proposal. I think those will be the same, basically. Yeah, the session is recorded. You will receive the link, but you will also be able to find it if you go to our YouTube channel. Just the Philanthropia YouTube channel, you will also find the recorded version of this webinar. So you can sign up for what is that called? Click the bell on our YouTube channel, and then you will get notifications every time we upload something new. And yeah, you can also see the recording of this webinar. Yeah, so the last question here is Wi-Fi, Canva, airtime. Those things I would include, or not include. I mean, those things should be covered in the core cost or overhead. So that would be covered in the percentage. If you have a project that specifically teaches kids to use Canva for their applications or whatever, then obviously Canva is a project cost. But if you're just using Canva in your office, then that should fall under stuff covered by the overhead percentage. So you don't have to list it out in the budget one by one, I think. And what are standard budget item lines? Yeah, the ones I said, like personnel, sometimes materials, other costs, services. It depends on the donor usually, the things that they want to include. And okay, just trying to read the comments at the same time as well. Okay, thank you so much. I think I went through most of the questions. Yeah, I hope we see you in our next webinar. It will be actually in 2 weeks about the sustainability plan and its importance for proposals. So please sign up for that as well. I hope to see you there. If you want to get this 5-module course that I was talking about at this special price today, again, you can use the coupon code. Let me check what it was again. And go to philanthropia.org to find the course there. The coupon code for the 50% off is Year of Change. And if you want to get 35% on the other courses, the coupon code is Fundraise. So just to remind you, but again, you will also get a follow-up email. But for that 5-module course, it hasn't been that cheap in a very, very long time. So if you were interested in getting this at any point, I think now is the moment. Thank you so much for having joined us today. I hope you were able to take something away from this and you learned something new that you'll be able to use in your proposals in the future. And I hope to see you in your next in our next presentation again. Thank you. Bye-bye.